go north. And so he had. He'd followed the Santa Fe Trail from New Mexico deep into the Comanche territory and beyond. At night he slept rough, the smoke of his small campfire bringing on haunting dreams. His days nodding on his saddle. For a time he stayed with a wagon train, trading the protection of his gun for food. Another time he stayed with a group of prospectors who were also heading north, the smell of gold dust filling their minds with a strange kind of fever. After many months in the saddle, he left the scrub lands and desert behind, entering the lush green flatlands of the Midwest. That night he dreamed of a great lake surrounded by low-lying hills and spruce forest. He woke with a name upon his lips. Hell Creek. It took Jacob another 3 days to locate the town. He had been directed from a rancher named David Bayan, who he'd met on the road. The man was thin as a weasel, with a rat face to boot, but his disposition was sunny. The two men rode together for a little while until they came to a crossroad. There, the skinny rancher had taken the path bearing to left. He had instructed Jacob to follow the path to the right that came out at the illustrious town of Hell Creek. Jacob had waved the man farewell, and hurriedly followed the path for some miles until, at last, he crested a small hillock, revealing the town below. From what Jacob could see, the town was aptly named. The town was bisected, almost split in half, by a small river that seemed to run straight through the middle. The side had been shored up with concrete, making a kind of small canal, which was spanned by a couple of rickety-looking bridges before it seemingly vanished underground. The town looked like something straight out of a fairy tale, and yet the whole scene made Jacob feel nervous. There was something here, something in the air, a kind of heaviness that made it difficult to breathe, like trying to breathe in a mouthful of syrup. "Well," he said to himself, "you're not gonna find out shit, sat here with your thumb up your ass. Get along, horse," he said, nudging the animal forward. But the big mare wouldn't move. Even when Jacob nudged her with his spurs, she wouldn't budge, but grew belligerent, snorting, pawing at the ground. Okay, Jacob said, dismounting and stroking her neck gently. "That's a girl," he crooned, taking her by the reins. He gently pulled her forward. At first she resisted, but after some cajoling and more than a little cursing, she reluctantly came along. The first building Jacob came to as he entered the town proper was a jailhouse. A man stood outside, slender, chugging on a cigar as he watched Jacob approach. "Morning," he waved, coming down the stairs and heading straight towards Jacob, who noticed the glittering star upon his chest. "Morning," Jacob replied, not liking the way the man's eyes roamed over him, lingering on the guns at his hip. "Afraid you have to check those shooting irons. Town ordinance, I'm afraid. No firearms inside the city limits." Jacob's eyes stayed on the man's own revolver. The other man followed him, grinning, and held out his hand. "Sheriff Marty Williams," he laughed. "I get to keep mine. Perks of the job." Jacob took the offered hand, which was soft and oily. He pumped it once and let it go. "Jacob. Name's Jacob Marston. Funny," he said, glancing around at the men passing to and fro. "Looks like a lot of these men are breaking the town ordinance." "I know them," the sheriff said, his eyes remaining, but his hand had dropped almost casually towards his gun belt. "But I don't know you. So, give 'em up, turn yourself around, go find another town to drink at. We ain't much for strangers anyway." "Okay," Jacob shrugged, unfastening his gun belt and handing it over. "I'll take the rifle, too," the sheriff said, nodding towards Jacob's horse. Jacob sauntered over to his mare, grabbed up the rifle and handed it over. "Had everything?" the sheriff asked. "Just my knife. You want that too?" "No, you can keep it. You can collect these," he said, hefting Jacob's gun, "when you leave. You just stay out of trouble while you're here. It's a good town with good people, quiet place. That's how we like it. You understand?" "Sure," Jacob replied. "All I want is a hot meal and a bath." I won't stay too long. Well, that's just fine. Have yourself a good day, Jacob. There a church in town? No, the sheriff replied over his shoulder. Burned down some years back. And you didn't rebuild it? Jacob called after him. But he was talking to fresh air. The sheriff had already gone, slamming the door behind him. One of the first things Jacob noticed as he crossed the street towards the local hotel and eatery was the women. Not because he hadn't been with one for a while, although he hadn't, but because they all seemed pregnant. Everywhere he looked, there was a round belly. From the earliest teenager girl right up to the woman far past their prime, all seemed to be carrying a heavy load. Well, he thought to himself a little ruefully, probably not much else to do in a little spat shit burg like this. For now, he put it out of his mind. He was hungry and filthy from his long months on the road. But all he wanted now was a hot meal and a warm bath. Later, he would head down the street, see if he could find this ruined church of theirs, and have him a little look around. His bath was like his meal, warm and barely satisfactory. His room was more of the same, a bed, a dresser, and not much else. Still, it was better than the hard-packed earth and a saddle for a pillow. Unable to resist the pull of sleep, Jacob laid down and was almost instantly asleep. He woke sometime later with the setting sun. The noise from the local saloon had become a rancorous background noise. Still, he was glad of it. If the bawling, singing, and drunken laughter had not woken him, he may have easily slept through to morning. And there was still much to do. Like, take a look at this burnt-down church of theirs. Not that there was anything unusual about a burnt-down church. Most of the houses, if not all the town, would be made from lumber. It was the fact that they had not rebuilt their house of worship that troubled Jacob. A church was a meeting place for the community, a beacon of hope in dark times, a place to cleanse the soul and seek forgiveness. Yet the denizens of Hell Creek had left theirs to rot for 2 years. It smelt wrong to Jacob, and he decided to check it out before he lost too much of the light. Hurrying down the stairs, he headed into the street and across a small wooden bridge to the local saloon. Whiskey had a way of loosening the tongues. Jacob had many questions. Pushing through the batwing doors, Jacob felt the atmosphere thick with cigar smoke, and the smell of cheap whiskey perfumed the air. For a moment, conversation faltered, and Jacob could feel many eyes upon him as he sauntered across the room to the beer-soaked bar. "Coffee," he said to the mustachioed man behind the bar. We don't sell coffee, stranger," the fat man sneered, wiping his hand on a filthy apron. "Only beer or whiskey. We may have a soda pop round here somewhere if you fancy it." That drew a few laughs from the group of nearby men at the bar, but Jacob ignored them. "Whiskey, then," Jacob said, his blue eyes drilling into the barman's face. "And be quick about it." The barman's smile wilted under the icy gaze, and he hurriedly poured Jacob's drink, sloshing a goodish amount on the bar before quickly scurrying away. Jacob turned and faced the room, but nobody met his gaze, and soon the piano player struck up another tune, breaking the ominous silence. Slowly, conversation started back up, and the denizens of the town went back to their drinking and debauchery, leaving Jacob alone to scan the room. He was on his second drink when he noticed the girl in the corner. She was dressed gaily, all feathers and tight corsets, and Jacob guessed correctly that she was one of the whores that worked the establishment. But unlike the other girls who flitted from customer to customer, trying hard to ply their trade, this girl sat alone, looking sullenly like a half-empty glass of beer. Jacob could clearly see the reason why. The girl was pretty, and had one hell of a scar running from her right eye across the bridge of her nose, petering off down the side of her left cheek. Someone did quite the number on her, Jacob thought, as he approached, trying not to draw too much unwanted attention. "Hi," he said, taking a seat beside her in a quiet corner. "Name's Jacob." "Annabelle," she said, smiling thinly. "You too broke to pay for a good whore? Wondering if you can get a discount for this one?" she said, gesturing to her face. you do. I don't mind paying the full price. Jacob smiled. I have more than a few scars of my own, and they bother me none. The girl smiled to think on this for a while before taking his hand and leading him upstairs to her room. They had barely got through the door when the girl started to strip. Okay, full price is $5. You can wash your pecker over there, she said, nodding her head to a wash bowl and jug. How about $10 and you get to keep your clothes on? The girl stopped fumbling at her corset and just looked at him. Lord God, what now? What kind of crazy shit you into, mister? Jacob laughed at this and sat down on the bed, hat in hand. No crazy shit. Just a little information's all. The girl laughed, harsh and unpleasant. Damn, mister, I don't know nothing about nothing around here. The simple thing. I just want to know where the local church is, that's all. You're going to pay me $10 and get directions to an old burnt-down church? Yep, Jacob replied. That and your silence. I don't want anyone to know that I'm looking into things. What things? The girl asked nervously, her eyes shifting around the room. There's nothing to look into. Mayhaps there is. Mayhaps there isn't, Jacob said, standing up. But I intend to take me a look anyways. You're an outsider here, like I am. You don't need no scar across your face to tell me that. I haven't been here long. I came looking for my sister. We worked in a cattle town about 30 miles from here. Well, that was before this happened. She gestured to her face. She said I was bringing her down, and so she left heading for Hell's Creek and new clientele. She didn't invite me to come along, so I stayed here in Stetson for a while. I missed her, so I took a stagecoach to town, but by the time I got here, she was already gone. At least that's what the sheriff said. I was convinced to stay in the end, she said, looking at the floor. Nobody ever leaves here. Not really. What do you mean? What's going on in this place? Keep your $10, the girl said, suddenly standing. St. Mark's, or what's left of it anyway, is at the west end of town, about 3 streets over, right on the outskirts. You may find somebody there who can help you. I'll keep your secret, but you should leave this town, Jacob. Just as soon as you can. No good can ever come from this place. And just like that, she was gone. Only the smell of her cheap perfume marked her passing. Jacob sat for a while, taking in her words before heading into the street, turning west through the growing shadows. 20 minutes later, he stood before the ruin of St. Mark's, which slumped in the darkness underfoot at Jacob's approach, as with a sigh he took in the devastation. Someone did quite the job, he whispered to himself, crumbling a piece of burnt charcoal under his nose, not surprised by the smell of gasoline he found there. A tittering cackle came from the shadows, and Jacob's hand flew to his waist. Finding nothing there, he drew his knife from the back of his jeans. Who's there? He called into the darkness. Put up your pig sticker, preacher man. Old Marjorie won't hurt you. Come out where I can see you, Jacob said, his eyes searching the darkness. The knife, the voice replied. Put it up, preacher, and come inside. Jacob took a deep breath, sheathed his knife, but kept his hand near as he entered the ruin. A light flared and grew brighter as an oil lamp was lit, driving back some of the gloom. Jacob squinted through the darkness, making out a hunched figure wrapped in tatty old blankets in one ruined corner. As he drew nearer, he saw that it was a woman, filth streaked with matted white hair. Who are you? He asked, stopping only a few steps away. How'd you know I was a preacher? The voice of the dead. I hear him, you see. Cries of all those poor dead children. What dead children? What happened in this place? Seen you, the woman sighed, a shudder racking her scrawny frame. A pale horse, rider in the wilderness. A man driven mad by God. I seen you wash in flames, preacher. Marjorie knows. Marjorie has the sight. You're mad.
Mad!
She hissed, thrusting her face into the light, revealing gaping sockets where her eyes should have been. Jacob swallowed hard, but said nothing.
Yeah,
she said, retreating back into the shadows.
Driven mad by the followers.
What followers? Makes sense, woman.
Cathod! The woman screamed. They took me down into the darkness. Look! She said, leaping to her feet, throwing off her lice-ridden blanket, revealing her nakedness beneath. There was a flash of steel, and the woman thrust a rusty-looking blade deep into her abdomen, drawing it across, disemboweling herself. Look! She cried, thrusting her filthy hand inside her ruined stomach, blood pouring from her mouth, cascading down her legs like a waterfall. Empty! So empty!
There was a sudden loud boom, and a smoking hole appeared in the dying woman's forehead. Jacob spun about with a cry and looked straight into the barrel of the sheriff's revolver. Take him, the sheriff said. The two burly-looking men who came on grinning as Jacob backed up, drawing his knife. Tut, tut, the sheriff laughed. Never bring a knife to a gunfight, boy. Now put it down, or I'll shoot your legs out from under you. For a moment, Jacob was tempted to fight. But with a curse, he threw his knife into the dust. Tie him up, hands behind his back, nice and tight. Tonight he shall witness the glory of Cathod before I offer him up as a sacrifice to the Old One. The hell are you talking about? Jacob cursed as the two men roughly tied his hands behind his back, the rough hemp rope digging rudely into his flesh. Who is that? You'll see, the sheriff sneered. You will see much and know an agony of delicious pain before this night is through. So I promise you. That I promise you. Bring him, he said to the two men. Congregation awaits. The town was all but deserted, as Jacob was half marched, half dragged through the night. Even the body saloon was dark, silent, and not a person moved through the streets. Eventually they arrived at the steep-sided canal where a small barge lit only by a burning oil lamp awaited them. Get in, the sheriff said, pushing Jacob hard over the edge. With a grunt, Jacob landed hard, groaning. He sat up as the other men leapt aboard, shoving him back down. Get us there, the sheriff said. The other two men hurriedly took up the oars and began to row through the brackish waters. Soon the stars appeared and were replaced by slime-covered bricks, as the small boat entered a shadowy tunnel leading beneath the silent town. What is this place? Jacob said, straining at his bonds, but the question was answered by a booted foot. Open your mouth again. I'll cut out your tongue, the sheriff said, grinning at him ghoulishly. Your heretic voice will not desecrate these sacred caverns. After what seemed like an eternity to Jacob's tired mind, the small boat came to a swaying halt. He was dragged out and thrust onto the stone-cold floor. Cursing, the two men dragged him back to his feet. What he saw then took his breath away. They were in a large, vaulted cavern. Stalagmites grew all about, strange black crystal formations lay dotted here and about, twisted into tortured forms. But it was not this that instilled such a deep-seated fear in Jacob. At the far end of the room, lit by flickering torches, was a great temple, built into the very bedrock itself. Huge spiral pillars rearing into the darkness, highly decorated with twisted, tortured symbols that hurt Jacob's mind just to look at. Welcome to the Temple of Chathat, the sheriff whispered into his ear. The Old One awaits inside. It's harvest time, time of reaping and gathering. He grows hungry, and his hunger must be sated. Jacob said nothing as he was led inside. Down a dark tunnel, his eyes were moving constantly, yet he kept his demeanor soft, all slumped shoulders and shuffling feet. A broken man was not so closely guarded and could make good use of an opportunity that should happen to arise. The tunnel suddenly ended, and the sheriff threw open a large wooden door, blackened with age. "Behold," he screamed, "the temple
of Chethat. Light flooded the tunnel, followed by a hellish chanting, like some terrible drum, charging the air with electricity, making it hard to breathe, causing Jacob's skin to tighten and crawl as he was pushed inside. Everywhere, there were people dressed in flowing red robes, their faces covered in white masks, making them look corpse-like in the flickering light of 1,000 torches. At the end of the room was a large stone altar. Behind it, a massive stone well loomed above a screaming woman who sweated, writhed, and twisted. As Jacob was dragged closer, he saw, to his horror, that the woman was in the deep throes of labor. Stood beside her was the high priest, his robes black as midnight, his mask carved with a single terrible glaring eye. "The sacrifice approaches," the priest screamed above the thunderous chanting. Reaching between the woman's quivering legs, he tore the newborn child from her, cutting the birthing cord with a small, glittering knife. At the sound of the child's first hitching breaths, the whole ground began to shake, and the terrible chanting turned into a screaming deluge as the great jet of filthy water gushed from the slime-encrusted well, rearing like a column into the fetid night air. Before Jacob's terrified eyes, the churning water began to take on shape, to transform until a great and terrible worm reared above him. Along its segmented body, 1,000 blind eyes twitched and turned. "Behold," the priest said, turning to his congregation, "the Great One, Chethat! We bring you sacrifice, great Lord," he said, raising the bawling child above his head. The creature let out a bellow of triumph, turning its swaying head from which glared a single crimson eye towards the now chanting priest. Its fanged mouth opened, revealing row after row of jagged teeth. It lunged forward, snatching the screaming infant up and down its throat, silencing its pathetic screams forever. "Now," the sheriff said, dragging Jacob forward, "you'll make a sacrifice unto him. He'll devour you, heart and soul, and you will live in him forever." "What is this?" The high priest glared down at Jacob. "Another sacrifice, Lord," the sheriff fawned, "for the old one is forever hungry." "So be it. Bring him to me. Let the old one be fulfilled." Jacob still did not struggle as he was dragged on, but his eyes searched frantically for a way out. "Chethat!" the old priest boomed, turning back towards the swaying worm. "Take this one onto yourself. Show him the fate of all heretics." Again, the worm let out a terrible bellow and began his downward strike. Just as Jacob's eyes opened to a nearby oil lamp, with a cry, he pistoned out his leg and shattered the burning lamp against the altar. Immediately, his booted foot and dusty jacket were set ablaze. The great worm tried to rear back, but it was too slow, as with a cry of outrage, Jacob tore a blazing spur across the crimson eye. The great worm screeched in agony and began to mindlessly flail about, crashing into Jacob and his captors, sending them sprawling on the floor, instantly killing the high priest as it writhed and rolled, blind and insane with agony. The room was now in complete disarray. The fire had spread, setting ablaze to the nearby crimson banners, catching on people's clothes as they fled in terror, trying to escape the thrashing worm. Jacob felt the flames burning his back, but did not run, but embraced them, thrusting his bound hands into the flames, ignoring the pain till at last his bounds parted. To his left, the sheriff, torn and bloody, was staggering to his feet. "You," he began, but that was as far as he went. Jacob closed the distance between them in 2 angry strides. His hands, fast as lightning, grabbed the sheriff's guns and shot the protesting man twice through the throat. He did not stop there, but turned his outrage upon the fleeing crowd, adding to their terror as he pumped round after round of hot lead into men and women alike. When the guns clicked empty, he turned around, ignoring the hot barrels, as he waded in, pistol-whipping them down and beating them with his booted heel as they tried to escape his terrible wrath, all the time making his way towards the waiting exit, dodging the writhing worm. The fallen god, Chethat, whose death throes had started to weaken as the fire burned its vile body, cleansed its filth from the world. At last, He made the doorway and threw himself through the flames, licking at his back. A few of the cultists had also managed to escape and were now fleeing down a small side tunnel. Just then, the earth let out another groan and the tunnel collapsed in a deluge of dust and rubble, burying the fleeing cultists alive. Scrambling to his feet, Jacob jumped into the small boat and grabbed up the paddles, rowing for all he was worth until at last he emerged onto the moonlit night. "Praise God," he gasped, leaping from the boat. And just then there was another great rumbling from deep in the ground as a part of the town suddenly tilted. Then, with a resounding crash and a roar of flames, it fell into the earth. By the flickering flame light, something seemed to move in the murky waters, something long and worm-like gliding through the depths. Jacob blinked his eyes. And it was gone. "Enough," he gasped, staggering away. "For the love of God, enough." Limping through the cold night, he headed to the nearby forest, wondering if his God would ever let him rest. And once again, he thought of Jesus asking for the cup to be taken from his lips, and laughed. "The Lord's far from the wicked," he whispered, "but hears the prayers of the righteous." The words were taken by the wind and smothered in the darkness. Behind him, Hell's Creek burned through the long night. The evil of Jethat, consecrated by righteous flames. Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and I wanted to tell you thank you so much for watching tonight's video or listening to tonight's episode of the podcast. If you guys are interested in finding audiobooks from me, a brand new audiobook's out. There's an audiobook. It's Pastel-Colored Dreams and Human-Flavored Nightmares, written by Vincent Venicava, which some of you might know is a really cool dude that I work with quite often, actually. You can head over to audible.com and find MrCreepyPasta to see all the audiobooks I've worked on, including Tales from the Gas Station and many, many more. And like always, I want to give a big thank you to all of my supporters on Patreon. You guys, as always, are the real MVPs, and I really appreciate it. If you guys want to join them, you can head over to patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta and see all these cool, fine folk that I'm about to mispronounce the names of here or in the description down below. People such as Jacob Shaffer, Zach, Jordan Alexander Sanchez, Brian Ars, Ken Lando Higuchi, Bobby Karman, Tristain Pelton, Chase Burnett, Diana Kraus, Melancholy Corpse, Hollow Zero, Ferb, Harley, Tainted Raven, Katie Birch, Sashi Suzaku, Katrina Beisel, Kayden the Spooky Boy, Zane Nightshade, MyBodySoundsLikeRiceKrispys, AshWood, Lord of the Weebs, Jay, Miss Xandra, MrUnsettlingSpaghetti, Eurogore, Tsuji Campbell, Marco Takes Dabs 420, Stricken, Azurine Fox, Robert White, Andre Garcia, Snails Brennard, Legit Quad Feed, Fried Chicken 12, James Bruce, Chris Levins, Freddy Krueger, Tynanny, 1-800-Nightmare, Unknown Nobody, Michael Scarborough, Infernal One, James Lowe, Lisa Cottrell, Jimbo the Hutt, Caspian, Jordan Ells, Hades' Nephew, Tater Chip, Acid System, Prozac and Pancake Appreciation Society, Cryptic Nightmares, Brennan Wright, Someone You Love, Kiri the Sloth, Tommy Green, Liam Newman, Sky Harbor, Caleb Dougal, Nina Smith, Nico Kyle, Rafael Rodriguez, The Ginger Bros, Aaron Stormcrow, Daniel Paulson, Trace Miles, and Corey Kenshin. Thank you guys, as always, for supporting the channel. You're all wonderful. I love every single one of you guys. For real. You guys help me out so much, as well as everybody down there in the description below, as well as everybody else who watches and subs and does everything else with this channel. Thank you guys so much. And as always, sweet dreams.